Hello there. Welcome to Keltus Reacts, a new series in which I react to stuff which may give me cancer. So, one of my channel patrons, Mr. John Hinch, recommended me this video, Professor Dave Explains channel, in which they supposedly talk about Israel. So, let me check this out and react to it.
Maybe the Middle East? Why not? This is propaganda, isn't it?
The state of Israel is, even though it's like, okay, Jews finally have a homeland, right? On the other hand, look where that homeland is. It's like a ghetto in, a neighborhood of others. Yes.
Israel is a ghetto in a neighborhood of others. Israel is a settler colonial state built on...
What? A settler colonial state? Is Professor Dave some sort of a communist, a leftist, a Chomskyite?
displacing indigenous people.
Indigenous people? Jews are indigenous people to the Middle East, one of the indigenous people. What does he think? That Arabs are indigenous people? Historically, Arabs invaded these lands in 7th century. But at the time of Israel's inception in 1948, there were already not only Jews who were indigenous, that is, who were living there for the last 5,000 years, there were also colonies, indeed colonies of European Jews established in the latter half of the 19th century on land which was either officially bought, especially by the Jewish Land Fund, and then parceled to individual landowners, bought from either Ottoman Turks or Arab landowners. So what's wrong with that? Israel was established as a democratic country on the basis of the UN partition of the British Mandate. What was in that land before the British Mandate? A settler colonial state known as the Ottoman Empire. Ottoman Empire, which literally resettled Muslims from Balkans, like Albanians or Bosniaks, into Palestine, into the Holy Land. And that's how this land was indeed settled. Of course, there were Arabs in that land, but they had no state. They had no state, but they also had no desire to have a state. Arabs did not want a national state in Palestine, although they got one state, Transjordan, the Emirate of Transjordan in 1921, but they had no desire to own another state. They simply did not want Israel to be a state. They did not want Jews to have a state. So they were quite happy with British rule of the Palestine after World War I. They were quite happy with Ottomans ruling Palestine before World War I. And they would be quite happy with everyone but the Jews ruling this land.
To steal their land and natural resources.
Professor Dave is a completely retarded person. Israel did not steal anything because either Jews in the latter half of the 19th century legally bought land, or in 1948, Israel was established as a parliamentary democracy on the basis of the UN partition of the British Mandate, where most of the land was public land. It was publicly owned land. Before World War I, it was owned by the monarch of the Ottoman Empire, the Sultan. After World War I, it was ruled by the civil administration of the British Mandate. And when Israel was established, the public land was administered by the Israeli civil administration. And if the Palestinian Arabs also agreed to having a state in 1948, their land, the public land under the jurisdiction of the Arab state, will also be ruled by public administration. So there was no land stealing, because the land was never Arab, collectively Arab. It was never owned collectively by Arabs. Never in the history of the Middle East, Arabs owned publicly the whole of the Palestine.
It's an industrial nuclear superpower built with Western money under the...
Well, you can say that it was built with Western money, but there's nothing wrong with that. European Jews migrating to Palestine in the latter half of the 19th century brought Western capital, Western know-how, Western technology, Western thinking about politics and economy. So they were, in fact, improving that land in a way that it had never been improved before. They brought civilization to the Middle East, the Jews.
False pretense of giving Jews an ethno-state that nobody should have in the first place.
Why? Why should Jews not have an ethno-state? When Jews, throughout 5,000 years or maybe 2,000 years of their history outside of any Israeli state, were completely oppressed, they were discriminated against. And in the 19th century, when nationalism in Europe became a thing, assimilated Jews came under severe threat from nationalistic masses of European people who saw assimilated Jews as an alien element to be eradicated. But perhaps Professor Dave never heard about the Dreyfus affair, where a French officer was accused of treachery, of high treason, only because he had Jewish background. The French public thought that a person with Jewish background is endemically unfaithful and disloyal to his country. Does Professor Dave ignore the events of the 1920s and 1930s with Jews being discriminated against in all European countries, which fell under the sway of fascism, but not only? In democratic France, anti-Semitism was so high, so strong, that Jews, not only were they discriminated against, but even the notion that France in the early 1930s should intervene to depose Hitler was thought absurd, because the French people, the French elites, the French political elites thought that Hitler's rule in Germany is actually good because he takes care of the Jewish problem. That's how French people thought in 1930s, that even though Hitler in Mein Kampf threatened to attack France, the French people were not afraid of Hitler and his rule in Germany at all, because they hated Jews so much and they thought that Hitler is doing good things by taking care of the Jews, that there's no way France should intervene and attack Germany preemptively.
Got any other hot takes?
And anti-Semitism is a recurrent fact of history. So you can imagine that it structures the mindset of people even in a long period of peace. There's always the question of, well, when is that bad pattern going to return?
Yes, sound the anti-Semitism alarm. Israel is bombing the shit out of everyone around them and murdering children by the tens.
Professor Dave is a piece of shit. I have no more patience for this piece of shit. He ridicules anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is part and parcel of the Arab mentality in the Middle East, is part and parcel of Muslim mentality, not only in the Arab world. The Muslim Albanians, they are rabid anti-Semites. Muslim Iranians, at least the regime of Iran, is extremely anti-Semitic. They see Jews are the spawn of Satan. Far left, totally anti-Semitic. Far right, totally anti-Semitic. Anti-Semitism is a recurring theme, is a very strong theme in these dark times.
Of thousands, because they're worried about all the anti-Semitism.
No, this is a complete intellectual dishonesty and manipulation. Professor Dave is a complete lunatic if he ignores the rabid anti-Semitism which percolates throughout the Western world, especially on the American campuses, university campuses, which are filled with anti-Semites, with rabid, far-left anti-Semites who hate Israel, but also hate America and hate the West. Professor Dave hates the West. It is a simple conclusion, a simple diagnosis, that people who hate Israel or are somehow ridiculing the growing specter of anti-Semitism are actually anti-Western fanatics, and Professor Dave surely is anti-Western fanatic. I don't know if I should listen more to his rant. He's a completely manipulative bastard.
Oh, Brett.
You can understand a hardline position that is not so interested in hearing about, peace, love, and understanding because it thinks that the realities of a world in which Jews are constantly being displaced, or which the tendency to displace them reemerges recurrently.
Jews are constantly being displaced. They're the ones doing the...
Completely false map. I will put in the real map here. So Professor Dave, who is a rabid anti-Semite and a piece of shit, anti-Western piece of shit, puts in a map which is completely false. This green territory here was never Palestinian land. It was public land administered by the British administration of the British Mandate of Palestine. Yeah, this was partition plan where the land in green was supposed to be the Palestinian Arab country, Palestinian Arab state, which never happened because Palestinians rejected their own state. And in 1949, this green land here was taken over by Jordan. Jordan invaded in 1948 and took over the West Bank, Judea and Samaria. But nobody cares that Jordan took over lands which were supposed to be for Palestinian Arab state. And this green territory here, the Gaza Strip, was taken over by Egypt. And this is, of course, these are Palestinian territories. This is in green here, where Palestinian Authority has the administrative duties, thanks to the so-called Oslo agreements, Oslo Accords. And here is the Hamastan. Hamas rules Gaza. All right, so I'm not going to listen to more of Professor Dave rants. This guy has proven to be a complete anti-Israeli, anti-Semite fanatic who is also anti-West and intellectually dishonest. So I don't know who that guy is. I've heard positive things about him, but I think he's a complete POS. So as you can see, never trust people who hate Israel because they manipulate at all times. All right, it's gonna be all.